All right. Hi, guys. So today's agenda, we're going to go a bit fast on that. International trade is what I was hoping to deal with today. Um, बहुत important topic है. So everything that is relevant to that, we'll try to cover all of that stuff. Give me 1 second and we'll start. Okay, G. So international trade, right? A few things about international trade. Obviously, ये chapter जो है फिर वो balance of payment और फिर sorry current account, which is only left in your course now, and how it might affect other macroeconomic objectives, currencies, how it will have an impact. In fact, today we're going to take a look at one of the questions this can that we're going to deal with unemployment, how it can have an effect on unemployment, right? So I'll just start off with the chapter and then I'll try to cover as much as we can using those chapters. Okay. So for example, if you look at this question right here, let me take this out, 8 marker. It says, explain the advantages a country may gain from engaging in international trade. Okay, it's a straightforward question. You have to explain all the advantages that are coming from international trade, import and export, basically, and consider the extent to which the theory of comparative advantage explains the pattern of international trade. Kis had tak, right? So it's a good 8 marker. It could have been a good 12 marker also back in the day. So what we're looking for over here is, honestly, for an 8 marker, there's way too much stuff because the thing is, the way they would expect us to break this down, the first part of the question, take care, which is this part. What are the advantages? I would say at least 2 to 3 advantages you would want to suggest. ठीक? So as far as the advantages go, and her advantage को ऐसे explain करना that you can get up to 2 marks on that, right? Never in pointers, always in paragraphs. This is me just telling you what you need to have. So when you have international trade, basically when you are talking about exports and imports, some of the merits or the advantages of this trade is greater choices. ठीक हो गया. Now you're going to take a moment and you're going to explain this idea. What do you mean by there's going to be greater choices? So what I mean is, you know how all countries do not have all the resources. So some goods they can make, some goods they can't make. Some goods they can make with good quality, some goods they can make, but not as good of a quality, right? So what happens through trade is that you can sell those things which other countries don't make, and then you can import those goods which other countries don't have. And as a result, the country has more choice, there's greater variety of goods and services. Secondly, you can even get yourself some lower prices. Now, in the second paragraph, you would explain how there can be lower prices uh, as a result of international trade. Now, what's the explanation behind it? The explanation would be that, some countries make certain goods of better quality as well as they have better labor and capital, which enables them to produce at lower cost, right? And because of those lower costs, because of the whatever factor of production, the capital or the technology they might have, or the quality of the labor force they might have, they might be able to produce more and achieve those economies of scale, jisko aap kehte hain, all right? And as a result, you know, you can buy the same stuff at lower prices. For example, even if you look at the cars produced in Pakistan versus car that you can import from China or any other country, there's a big difference in the prices, right? So आप आराम से जो है उसको सस्ते रेट पे मंगा सकते हो. That could be your second reason. Now, obviously, other reasons sort of like get connected, you know, something to do with there's more efficient allocation of resources. That could be your third merit ka point. Why would you have more efficient allocation of resources? Because you'll see that your country is not good in the production of a certain good, then we should not be producing it. We should be producing a good in which we're good at, right? तो उसकी बेसिस के ऊपर then you would decide कि ठीक है जी हमें जो है पाकिस्तान में शुगर प्रोड्यूस नहीं करनी चाहिए बिकॉज शुगर बहुत ज़्यादा जो है पानी भी कंज्यूम करती है और उससे बेहतर है कि हम कॉटन प्रोड्यूस करें and stuff like that, right? And resource allocation will be much better. And then फिर lifestyle में improvement और ये वो जितनी भी चीजें हैं, that is a result of these advantages that you're gonna have. ठीक है? Something like I mentioned, increased competition का होना. That's a separate point altogether. Like for example, when you have import and export, um, जो चीजें आप मुल्क में अच्छा नहीं बनाते हो, it's gonna face competition from abroad, and then either your country is gonna improve and find better ways to produce those goods, or we will then have to find other ways through which we could uh, reallocate our resources. इन 3 पॉइंट्स को टू बी ऑनेस्ट 8 मार्क के लिए भी अगर तुम वेल एक्सप्लेन करो 3 पॉइंट्स को इस तरह तो 2-2 मार्क्स अगर आप उठाते हो तो आपको 6 मार्क्स तो इधर ही मिल जाते हैं. ठीक हो गया. So in my opinion, these 3 points good enough if you explain it correctly. तो फिर वो ठीक है. Appreciation, Herman, you mean in terms of currency? Yeah, honestly, appreciation इतनी जल्दी नहीं जा सकते हम उसके ऊपर. When we talk about advantages, disadvantages of trade, then appreciation becomes very conditional. That what kind of good are you exporting? Are you exporting an inelastic goods? Are you getting good money from it? The demand is more of your currency or your import. So export import दोनों होता है ना international trade. So you have to look at it from both point of view. So currency की appreciation depreciation really depends on whether you're exporting more or not. So we want to work with more generic points, like the 2-3 that we've mentioned. And then you can even suggest like through international trade, you can use different resources of different countries. जो आपके पास पहले नहीं थी, now you get to consume it. Economies of scale, because जब आप international trade करते हो, so you can produce in larger quantities, and as a result, your average cost can fall down, and you can produce larger quantities. In fact, I think notes के अंदर तो I've even mentioned that international trade की वजह से जब countries आपस में interdependent हो जाती हैं, so as a result, they don't want to get into conflict also because they're so tied. Like for example, I think very good example is India taking a neutral stance on Russia when they attacked Ukraine. So India was also told to oppose the action and put sanctions on them. And they said, we can't, we're too dependent, heavily dependent on the weapons and the energy on the Russians. We're just going to condone that you should not have a war and you should have a dialogue, but we can't choose a camp, something like that, right? So that's a good example of international trade making countries be more reliant on each other. Okay, G. Second part of the question, let's take a look at that and consider the extent to which theory of comparative advantage explains the pattern of international trade. Pattern of international trade. Do you understand what we mean here? Yeah, that pattern of international trade का क्या मतलब हुआ? That certain decisions that are being made about export and import, right? तो उसके ऊपर कंसिडर द एक्सटेंट टू विच द थ्योरी, पहले तो हमें समझाना पड़ेगा जी कंपैरेटिव एडवांटेज की थ्योरी क्या है, ठीक है। एंड इट्स स्ट्रेंज कि ये इतने से कम मार्क्स के लिए ये कंसिडर का पार्ट है। आई थिंक ये नॉलेज एंड अंडरस्टैंडिंग में इसको लेके जाएंगे। तो यू गॉट टू एक्सप्लेन the comparative advantage theory. What is the theory? This is what I need, at least at least. The comparative advantage is when a country decides to produce a good or service, okay, in which it has lower opportunity cost in comparison to other countries, okay. Why do countries have lower opportunity cost? There can be various reasons, actually. I'm going to mention a few. The country is going to produce a good in which they have lower opportunity cost as compared to other competing country. And the reason for comparative advantage could be, number one, it could be something simple as the factor endowment. The factor endowment is simply certain resources that they have. It could be certain natural resources that they might have, like coal or oil or something like that. Or it could be something as simple as the kind of human capital they might have. Human capital, the word मैंने कब use किया? Human resource is separate from human capital, right? So it's about the natural resource that you might have. It's about the human capital that you might have. And it could be about the technology, not technology, let's talk about the physical stock of capital or physical capital that you might have, machines and things like that, infrastructure and stuff like that, right? Physical stock likha hai, physical capital I'm talking about, machines and all. Please, human capital is how skillful your resources is, and human capital, the physical capital is how much machines you might have, how much stock of machines you might have. So that directly affects your productivity. उसके अलावा क्या हो सकता है? वेल उसके अलावा और भी रीजंस हैं। एक रीजन फैक्टर एंडाउमेंट के अलावा ये भी हो सकता है, मे बी द एक्सचेंज रेट, you know, the country's exchange rate that you might have. क्या हो गया exchange rate? Your country's currency is competitive compared to the other country's currency. So they might find your goods to be cheaper, or your currency might be stronger, so you might find other countries' currency to be cheaper. तो उसकी वजह से हो सकता है कि आपको एक ultimate edge मिल रहा हो when importing and exporting, and then you can sell it at a much more competitive rate. उसके अलावा it could be even on the basis of technology. Technology को मैं separate कर रहा हूँ capital से, because remember capital is me having model printer model 2030, right? And having one machine, two machine, three machine, four machine of that. फिर एक होता है 2030 की जगह 2040 model, right? Something even more sophisticated. So if my country has more advanced technologies, then obviously जो मेरे पास comparative advantage आएगा in producing certain goods, it's going to be greater than other countries. तो इस तरह से और भी बहुत सारी चीजें हो सकती हैं जिसके अंदर एक्सपोर्ट सब्सिडीज मिल रही है, नहीं मिल रही, उसकी वजह से गवर्नमेंट अगर आपको एक्सपोर्ट सब्सिडीज में हेल्प कर रही है तो आपके पास ऑटोमेटिकली कंपैरेटिव एडवांटेज आ जाएगा, यू नो। anyhow, so I think first couple of points, work with factor endowment technology maybe, and that's good enough, जिसकी वजह से आपके पास ये होती है। Now, obviously, there are certain limitations to this theory, क्योंकि उसमें लिखा हुआ है to what extent does it explain, right? So first you were explaining that this is how it's going to work, but to what extent को जब तुम आंसर करने जा रहे हो, that is your another 2 mark, कि to what extent is it able to explain the reality, So that is where I will talk about the limitations. By the way, just so you know, जब भी तुम्हारा evaluation का हिस्सा आएगा, assumptions and limitations goes parts of your evaluation, and you can discuss in terms of if it applies, short run, long run के हिसाब से बात कर सकते हो. यहाँ पे तो simple है limitations of the theory. There were certain assumptions in the theory, right? What assumptions did we have? हमने कुछ assumptions रखी है ना comparative advantage में. दो countries हैं, दो goods बना रही हैं. एक कंट्री जो दो गुड्स है जो बना सकती है उसके अंदर जो फैक्टर्स हैं वो परफेक्टली मोबाइल है. एक शर्ट का रिसोर्स शूज में जा सकता है, शूज का शर्ट में जा सकता है विदाउट एनी स्ट्रेस. जब आप एक गुड बना के दूसरे कंट्री में एक्सपोर्ट करते हो तो यू आर अस्यूमिंग देयर इज नो ट्रेड बैरियर्स जो उस प्रोडक्ट को महंगा कर देगा. देयर इज फ्री ट्रेड. In fact, we even assume there is no transportation cost. For example, it's quite possible that USA might be making inefficient cars and Japan might be making efficient cars. But when you add the Gadi ka transportation cost, it's quite possible that the Japanese car turns out to be more expensive when it's transported. या फिर अगर यूएस के अंदर उसके ऊपर टैरिफ्स और ड्यूटीज लगी है तो व्हेन इट कम्स टू द पोर्ट इट बिकम्स एक्सपेंसिव. लाइक फॉर अस एक पाकिस्तान का केस है, कोई 300-400% गाड़ी महंगी हो जाती है जब बाहर से आ रही होती है हमारे पास, राइट? So the limitations that we have is that in reality, transportation costs might take away the advantage. I think the better way would be to write the assumption that we assume under comparative advantage theory that there is no transportation cost. However, in reality, transportation cost might take away the advantage of lower opportunity cost. I think that is one. ऐसी एक आध दो और बता दो. Like for example, there is an assumption that factors are perfectly mobile, but in reality, factors of production are not perfectly mobile between two goods, right? फिर तुम टैरिफ का भी ऐड करना चाहो तो टैरिफ का भी ऐड कर सकते हो. Okay, let me see what. Yeah, and we also assume, yeah, that's right, Harman. We also assume that we assume कि जी एक कंट्री की शर्ट और दूसरी कंट्री का शूज और दूसरे का शूज और तुम्हारा शर्ट दोनों की क्वालिटी एग्जैक्टली सेम है तो पीपल आर इनडिफरेंट विद व्हाटएवर क्वालिटी they might have. They'll be perfectly okay with the other country's product also, completely ignoring the idea of the quality or the difference in quality. Anyhow, then they say, I'll just read out a paragraph from a book, which is a good evaluative paragraph, actually. So all these are the reasons that I've just mentioned and the limitations. So for these and other reasons, the actual pattern of trade flows does not fully reflect comparative advantage. Still, comparative advantage is the most useful concept in understanding and explaining much of what is going on in the world of trade. Government can and historically have promoted policies that help to create a comparative advantage in specific industries. ये होता है, by the way. जैसे हमारे यहाँ government शुगर इंडस्ट्रीज को थोड़ा सा हेल्प आउट करती है, प्रमोट करती है. आईटी के अंदर, इंडिया के अंदर मैसिवली दिस वाज डन. But why do we tend to do that? So a government could invest in education, increase the stock of human capital and raise labor productivity and lowering average costs in specific industries. And it could create favorable investment conditions for private firms by ensuring price stability. So long run equilibrium अच्छा सा मिलेगा. This is all I can think about is how India did their Silicon Valley and how they promoted in the 1990s जब उन्होंने टेक कंपनी सिलिकॉन वैली इन्होंने लॉन्च किया था, तो उसके अंदर दे मेड universities, they called professors from abroad, they took in the curriculum from the foreign countries, they translated it into their languages, they set up an entire infrastructure behind it, they educated the people, and now you have one of the biggest tech giant offices in Calcutta and places like that. So ये भी एक comparative advantage, क्योंकि the thing is sometimes you have to develop comparative advantage and it might take some time for you to do that. Once you have found your comparative advantage, then you can compete with the world. But up until you have not, तो आप क्या कहते हो? आप कहते हो जी short run के अंदर let's put some barriers to trade, and in the long run we'll be able to compete and we'll be able to harness all the human capital and the physical capital that we have accumulated and all, and that sort of like can help us, right? So उस angle के ऊपर भी you can suggest, but this is how your answer is gonna be dealt with. ठीक है जी, फिर आते हैं एक और क्वेश्चन के ऊपर, क्योंकि this covers mostly international trade comparative advantage. I'm not talking about absolute. Please do take a look at absolute also. It's a much relatively smaller concept, but do take a look at it. Are there any solved answers for this question? Not specifically. I don't think specifically, but let me take a look at it. Final play के अंदर again 2 mark को हटा के, let me see. This is A2 AF. Final play. I think you might have it. आगे बढ़ते हैं. Yeah, question number 48 is about comparative advantage. It's sort of like it's a combination of the two questions actually. जो मेरिट वाला पार्ट आया है वो बेसिकली कंपैरेटिव एडवांटेज के उसके अंदर नहीं होगा, तो दैट इज समथिंग दैट वुड बी मिसिंग इन दिस क्वेश्चन. लेकिन कंपैरेटिव के ऊपर पूरा नाइस होलसम क्वेश्चन की अगर बात की जाए इन पार्ट ऑफ एक्सप्लेनिंग द होल कंपैरेटिव एडवांटेज, तो आई वुड अस्यूम कि एक अच्छा खासा डिसेंट आंसर होना चाहिए. या इट्स एन 8 मार्कर. या इट्स एन 8 मार्कर. या ये अपॉर्चुनिटी कॉस्ट को सिर्फ 8 मार्क का एक्सप्लेनेशन वाला है, तो इसमें आई डोंट थिंक लिमिटेशंस की बात हो रही होगी. दिस इज जस्ट एक्सप्लेनिंग कंपैरेटिव एडवांटेज. तो इसमें नहीं है. लेट मी सी इफ आई कैन फाइंड इट ओवर हियर. टॉपिकल ऐसे वीडियोस में देख लो. प्रॉब्ली इसमें भी नहीं होगा. इट्स एक्चुअली द सेम. नो, कंपैरेटिव एडवांटेज पे है, उसकी लिमिटेशंस के ऊपर नहीं है. take out time and write it and send it to me and I'll help you with that. I've generally told you कि क्या pattern क्या है उसका. Evaluation basically you bring in a discussed question. अब तो वो 8 mark के लिए भी valid हो गया. All right, let's talk about another question. 2A I'm gonna see. 2A अच्छा question है, basic सा question है, which talks about the barriers. So let's take a look at this one. Explain the difference between an import tariff and an import quota, and consider which would be more effective in reducing imports. कौन सा ज़्यादा effective होगा? काफ़ी बड़ी depends का question है ये, but let's talk about it anyways. So I'm going to spend a good amount of time, like at least like 2 to 3 marker trying to explain. I think I would start off by saying that import tariffs and import quotas are both part of protectionism, right? They're both part of protectionism, basically, which are barriers to trade, right? Key distinctions कर लेते हैं. Number one, जब हम import tariff की बात करते हैं, तो import tariff is imposed on the price of the imported good. इसकी वजह से प्राइस बढ़ जाती है और इंपोर्ट गिरनी चाहिए, एटलीस्ट फ्रॉम द वॉल्यूम क्वांटिटी ऑफ इंपोर्ट. लेट्स डू दैट. क्वांटिटी ऑफ इंपोर्ट gonna fall as a result of that. What I would do is I would make a diagram to support. इसमें तो नहीं मांगा है लेकिन I would still do it. और international trade का अगर तुमको याद हो, so the way I've done the diagrams is slightly different. That's domestic demand, domestic supply. And this is the world supply, right? And this is the world price. World price के ऊपर जो है ये quantity supplied है, ये quantity demanded है. All of this quantity is getting imported. जब आप इस पे टैरिफ लगाते हैं तो ये ऊपर चला जाता है, तो world supply plus tariff looks like this, and the price becomes PW plus T. As a result, the quantity reduces, and you might be able to notice that now the import unit has fallen. This is how the import tariff basically works. अच्छी explanation है, अच्छा difference है, reasonable diagram है. Diagram को आपको वो explain करना है. Diagram बनाओ और diagram को explain ना करो. What you have to do is you have to explain the diagram to show that how import has been reduced effectively. Okay जी, moving on. उसके अलावा क्या करना है? One second. उसके बाद number 2, when you talk about what are we talking about next? You're going to be talking about the import quota. What is that? It is basically, you gotta mention this. एक को हमने बोला था, it goes on the price of the good. इसके अंदर you would say this is the physical quantity that you're basically allowing to come into the country, right? तो इसके अंदर भी जो डायग्राम बनता है, इसके अंदर आप क्वांटिटी के थ्रू लिमिट कर सकते हैं. इसका जो डायग्राम बनता है एग्जैक्टली वही डायग्राम बनाएंगे. डोमेस्टिक डिमांड, domestic supply, and the world supply is like here. World supply over here, and this is the PW. This is being imported Q1 से लेके Q2 तक. फिर मैंने कहा कि चलो इसके ऊपर कोटा की अलाउंस कर देते हैं. कितनी कोटा की अलाउंस कर देते हैं वो तो क्योंकि एक फिजिकल लिमिट होता है, तो इट्स जस्ट गोना शिफ्ट द कर्व टू द राइट. ये हो गया डोमेस्टिक प्लस कोटा. यहाँ से यहाँ तक जो हॉरिजॉन्टल गैप है वो कोटा रिप्रेजेंट करता है. बिकॉज व्हाट आर वी सेइंग इज कि देखो इस पीडब्ल्यू की प्राइस पे ओरिजिनली जो डोमेस्टिक प्रोड्यूसर्स थे दे वर विलिंग एंड एबल टू सेल Q1. अब कोटा के बाद ये कोटा की अमाउंट है जो उसके ऊपर डोमेस्टिक प्रोडक्शन के ऊपर प्लस अलाउ कर दी है. तो दिस सॉर्ट ऑफ लाइक कम्स अप विद एस टोटल डोमेस्टिक प्लस द कोटा अमाउंट. अब क्या हुआ? अब द थिंग इज कि अभी भी शॉर्टेज है, ठीक है? तो अब इतनी लोकल प्रोडक्शन हो गई, इतना बाहर से इंपोर्ट होके आ गया. अब एक शॉर्टेज है, तो ये शॉर्टेज अब आप इंपोर्ट तो कर नहीं सकते हो क्योंकि कोटा ऑलरेडी इंपोर्ट हो चुका है. द अमाउंट ऑफ इंपोर्ट इज दिस इज द अमाउंट दैट यू आर इंपोर्टिंग. अब क्या होगा? एज अ रिजल्ट द प्राइसेस will start going up, and this would be the new price at which after quota the product will be sold basically. So this is also going to raise the price up, and the quantity of import basically is not falling down, but you're sort of limiting it. पहले के हिसाब से पहले क्या हो रहा था, इतना सारा import हो रहा है. अब now which one is more effective? Now that's your evaluation wala part, which one is more effective. अब this is the tricky part here. Imports, if you notice, दोनों के अंदर कम हो रहा है, ठीक है? अब the thing is, the good thing about quota is, in quota you can exactly pinpoint इतनी quantity का import आ सकता है, इससे ज्यादा नहीं आ सकता. So I think that's a very effective way of reducing imports if you want to, कि जी इससे ज्यादा नहीं आ सकता, लिमिट लग गई है import की. आप इसकी import का quota और कम कर दें, you will be able to restrict it. Problem क्या है? Problem is supervision करनी पड़ जाएगी कि कोई बाहर से तो नहीं आ रहा, because remember there is a shortage and that shortage might cause the prices to go up or start creating a black market कि लोग क्वांटिटी कम आ गई है उसको फिर हाई प्राइसेस पे बेचने की कोशिश करें. तो अब सुपरविजन होगी कि जी ज्यादा तो नहीं आ रहा बाहर से, जितना कोटा अलाउ किया था उतना ही कोटा आ रहा है. तो ये जो चीजें हैं ये थोड़ी सी प्रॉब्लमैटिक हैं कोटा के सिस्टम के अंदर. ठीक है. जहां तक इंपोर्ट ड्यूटीज की बात है, देयर आर सर्टेन गुड थिंग्स अबाउट इट. ये थोड़ा सा आपने टैरिफ लगा दिया, लेकिन good thing is government को पैसे मिल जाएंगे. That government can use that money for whatever reason, merit, public goods, educating people वगैरह वगैरह, healthcare, you know, helping industries be more competitive वगैरह वगैरह. But the problem is, अगर यही goods inelastic हो जाए, यही डिमांड और सप्लाई का कर्व अगर मैं inelastic कर दूं, तो क्योंकि inelastic goods में अगर मैं टैरिफ भी लगाता हूं, तो जो रिडक्शन आएगा वो relatively imports के अंदर कम आएगा, because people will continue to import those goods and services. So that might be a little problematic here. So that is something that we can talk about in this one. जहाँ तक surpluses की बात है, दोनों cases के अंदर you can go in the notes and you can check. दोनों cases के अंदर जो है consumer surpluses are falling. Let me show it to you. In fact, I'll highlight it. Original consumer surplus was this much at world prices, लेकिन टैरिफ लगने के बाद ये सारा कंज्यूमर सरप्लस लूज हो जाता है, द वन इन द रेड. कोटा के केस के अंदर ओरिजिनली ये सारा सरप्लस हो रहा था, और फिर जब कोटा लग जाएगा तो उसके बाद भी रिडक्शन आ जाएगी. तो दिस वुड बिकम द न्यू सरप्लस, और ये दिस वुड बी द लॉस इन द सरप्लस. प्रीटी मच सेम स्टैंडर्ड सिचुएशन है, डेड वेट लॉस दोनों में क्रिएट होगा. पर कौन सा ज्यादा इफेक्टिव है? आई वुड से इट इज सर्कमस्टेंशियल. Quotas can be very much effective because the government can target कौन सी नॉन एसेंशियल चीजें हैं, let's reduce the size of that, क्योंकि and you can actually put bans and stuff. Quota is not banned, but quota is limiting. Like for example, सिगरेट के ऊपर आपने कोटा लगा दिया, अल्कोहल के ऊपर आपने कोटा लगा दिया, वेपन्स के ऊपर आपने कोटा लगा दिया, हेवी हाई ऑयल पेट्रोल कंज्यूमिंग कार्स more than 14, I think पाकिस्तान के अंदर any car more than 1400 cc is considered luxury, तो उसके ऊपर आपने लगा दिया, right? So you can be very pinpoint to specific to the market and you can cater that, right? तो आप उसकी quantities को reduce कर सकते हैं. ये एडवांटेज आपके पास इसमें नहीं है इंपोर्ट ड्यूटीज के अंदर, राइट? उसमें क्या होगा, उसके अंदर जो इनइलास्टिक गुड्स हैं, यूजुअली वेपन्स, एक्सपेंसिव कार्स, फॉर द रिच पीपल इट सॉर्ट ऑफ लाइक बिकम्स इनइलास्टिक. तो काफी सारी इस तरह की जो चीजें हैं वो इनइलास्टिक हो जाती हैं नेचर के अंदर, तो वो आएंगी फिर भी. बट गुड थिंग इज इसमें गवर्नमेंट को पैसे मिल जाएंगे, इसमें गवर्नमेंट को पैसे नहीं मिलेंगे, उसमें प्रोड्यूसर्स को मिल जाएंगे. Can we put quota and tariff on one product? It won't make sense. It's not gonna help you out. क्या आप उसके ऊपर कोटा भी लगा रहे हो और फिर ड्यूटीज भी? आई एम श्योर हो सकता है पाकिस्तानी गवर्नमेंट करती भी हो कि इतनी गाड़ियां आ सकती हैं साल के अंदर, और उसके ऊपर हर गाड़ी के ऊपर एक एक लगाने में लगा भी सकते हो. डबल इम्पैक्ट आएगा, डबल प्राइसेस के अंदर राइज आएगा उसके अंदर, उस सर्टेन केस के अंदर. पर इट वुड बी अ वेरी स्ट्रेंज थिंग टू डू. ठीक. So that's how you would answer a question like this one. ठीक हो गया. Because remember, evaluation, most effective. Which one is the most effective? We want a discussion. You don't necessarily have to choose कि ये ज़्यादा effective है कि ये कम effective है. And there is no wrong answer as long as you are talking about it correctly. ठीक हो गया. All right, moving on to the next one. इसका part B देख लेते हैं ज़रा. By the way, मैंने तो सिर्फ तुमको कोटा और import duty कराया है. Subsidy भी बेशक आ सकता है. ठीक है. So make sure that you look at how the subsidy can lower the prices also and make your goods competitive in the international market. The problem is, what if government does not have the money to give subsidy? Or what if the government is not able to monitor if the subsidy is actually being used to produce goods and lower the prices? हो सकता है लोग जेब में डाल दें वो सब्सिडी के पैसे, right? All right, moving on. Look at this question for a second. अच्छा सवाल है. तो क्या ऑल्सो रिमेंबर, देखो मैंने तुम लोग को काफ़ी सारी चीज़ें पढ़ाई हैं जो कोर्स से निकल गई है, राइट. आई मेंशनड इट जस्ट बिकॉज ऑफ द फैक्ट कि वो व्हेन यू आर सॉल्विंग एमसीक्यूज, कुछ पुराने एमसीक्यूज में तो सब चीज़ें हैं, तो वो पूरा डेटाबेस के अंदर बहुत सारी चीज़ें जो की हुई हैं. ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा जो फिक्स और मैनेज एक्सचेंज रेट है, दैट हैज़ बीन टेकन आउट मेजरली. कैनन्स ऑफ टैक्सेशन भी हटा दिया है. ये थोड़ा माइक्रो की साइड के ऊपर है कि टैक्स कैसा होना चाहिए, उसके अंदर क्या क्या एलिमेंट्स होने चाहिए. आई हैव स्टिल पुट दैट देयर कि तुम लोग केस स्टडीज और उसके लिए इट्स नॉट अ मच ऑफ अ बिग थिंग. छोटी छोटी चीज़ें हैं. आई वुड स्टिल सजेस्ट कि जस्ट डू इट फॉर द सेक ऑफ लर्निंग. इस साल नहीं तो अगले साल तो करना ही है उसको दोबारा, राइट. ओके जी. Discuss whether protectionism can reduce unemployment. Okay. Normally, जो क्वेश्चन आता है वो आता है कि प्रोटेक्शनिज्म अच्छी है कि नहीं है, प्रोटेक्शनिज्म जस्टिफाइबल है कि नहीं है, वगैरह वगैरह. यू डू योर आर्ग्यूमेंट फॉर एंड अगेंस्ट. ओके. फॉर एंड अगेंस्ट मैंने किया हुआ है. आर्ग्यूमेंट्स फॉर प्रोटेक्शनिज्म तो बड़ी सिंपल सी आर्ग्यूमेंट्स है. प्रोटेक्शनिज्म क्यों चाहते हैं? वेल, प्रोटेक्शनिज्म हम इसलिए चाहते हैं क्योंकि जो हमारी इन्फेंट इंडस्ट्रीज हैं, आप चाहते हैं कि उन इन्फेंट इंडस्ट्रीज को प्रोटेक्ट किया जाए. क्यों? क्योंकि उन्होंने अभी तक अपना कंपैरेटिव एडवांटेज नहीं फाइंड किया है. You want to protect those industries till they find their comparative advantage, till they get their economies of scale, because without that they would diminish, they would be eradicated. ठीक है? And if those different industries are not protected, how would that impact unemployment? Well, clearly, those industries are not protected, there's going to be more unemployment. So if we protect those industries and we let them flourish and we let them grow and expand, they're going to hire more and more people. And that's going to reduce unemployment. So I think, you see how I've just converted my whole infant industry argument and made a connection to the idea that yes, it can reduce unemployment. However, यहीं पे अगर मैं evaluation भी डाल दूं, ठीक है, कि whether infant industry arguments may not reduce unemployment. Sometimes, and foolish governments do that. Sometimes they feel that they might be able to find comparative advantage in something, and they might start an entire industry around it. And turns out, after some decades, they realize, or after a few years, they realize that we don't have a comparative advantage in this particular field because, we don't have the natural resource for it, or human capital for it, or the physical capital for it. And then in that case, it would not work for us. It would be a very bad idea. to pursue an infant industry of that sort. And governments can do that. They do silly mistakes like that. I can't remember, but I know one of the cases of Pakistani government doing something silly like that. Uh, infant industry के अंदर I can't remember which one it was it specifically, but there was. Anyhow, I think I've got my point across. दूसरी आर्ग्यूमेंट दूसरी आर्ग्यूमेंट हम कहते हैं अबाउट द सनसेट इंडस्ट्री. ये कौन सी इंडस्ट्री है? ये वो इंडस्ट्रीज हैं जिनके पास कंपैरेटिव एडवांटेज था, अब खत्म हो गया है. They have not upgraded themselves, maybe they haven't moved to better, newer machines, they haven't gone through the new training cycle or educated class of workforce, because of which they are aista aista se competing out. For example, in Pakistan case, the textile industries, where it's sort of like a declining industry right now. It's also called a declining industry or a sunset industry. So what is happening is that we're losing the skill and the motivation, and that's a problematic situation. Unemployment is going up as a result of that. So protectionism के through आप इनको protect करते हैं from foreign competition so that they can sustain. पाकिस्तान में textile industry को protect करना बहुत जरूरी है, क्योंकि it's a major employer of workforce, right? So you got to protect them. But evaluation, थोड़ा long run perspective से सोचते हैं. In the long run, कब तक बचाओगे? Because these industries will keep on taking advantage of being inefficient, and आज नहीं तो कल you will become so incompetitive that you will have to shut it down. And then you will have another problem that जो दूसरी इंडस्ट्री को आप प्रमोट कर सकते थे ऑल्टरनेटिव को, you failed to do that, and now as a result you have to see more unemployment in the long run, but at least short run में तो unemployment आप कम कर जाओगे. तो ये जो excuse me, जो मैं short run long run की बात कर रहा, ये आपका evaluative part है. So I'm doing evaluation and connecting. One of the arguments we also made was dumping wala na. You remember that dumping, आप protectionism लगाते हो dumping के ऊपर. Dumping is when foreign country is selling a good at below cost. Below cost. That means they're actually incurring loss to sell it to your country. So we say this might be that they have overproduced it and they just want to get rid of the surplus, or they're trying to penetrate into the market and jaan karke they want to shut down our local industries, right? So ab uske andar, whether it will be able to reduce unemployment, I would say if you put anti-dumping duty and you don't let that product come into the country, then you're protecting your local firms and they will continue to employ people. But if you don't put dumping, then obviously those firms can get shut down, and as a result, your firms can be competed out. But remember, for example, Pakistan is so inefficient in producing cars, and the West is so efficient in producing cars, कि जो हमारी प्राइस है जिसको हम अस्यूम करेंगे कि हाँ जी 40 लाख रुपए के ऊपर, अगर मैं कहता हूँ 40 लाख रुपए फॉर सुजुकी और कल्टस, आई थिंक स्विफ्ट लेट्स से 40 लाख रुपए की मैं बनाता हूँ, इंडिया उसको 30 लाख की बनाता है, पाकिस्तान के अंदर वो 35 की बेचते हैं, उनके लिए तो प्रॉफिट हो रहा है. हम सोच रहे हैं हमारी प्राइस के हिसाब से तो 5 लाख सस्ती बेच रहे हैं. They're dumping, but technically they're not dumping. They're far efficient than you. तो उनके लिए तो loss making नहीं है. It's just a more efficient allocation of resource that's taking place. So उस point of view से we could even argue that dumping does not necessarily mean that the other country is selling below cost. It might be that for your country you're so inefficient that for you it feels कि आप below cost वो बेच रहे हैं. Obviously, the problems with protectionism as an overall आंसर यहाँ पे तो आपने सिर्फ उसको आर्ग्यू करना था इन टर्म्स ऑफ वेदर इट विल reduce unemployment or not, but on a holistic argument for a question जिसके अंदर हम बैरिस्टर रेट के 12 मार्केट एडवांटेजेस डिसएडवांटेजेस की बात करते हैं तो उसमें you want to discuss the short run and the long run implications and you want to discuss ऐसे वाले क्वेश्चन में ना जो वो वाला क्वेश्चन होता है can it be justified or not? Protectionism is justified versus not justified. Justified के अंदर तो ये तीन arguments is good enough for any number of questions. ये तीन लिखो 12 मार्क के लिए that's good enough. लेकिन जो काउंटर आर्ग्यूमेंट होगी उस वाले क्वेश्चन के अंदर whether it's justifiable or not, उसके अंदर you can go into and suggesting the merits of free trade जो अभी हमने किया ना more efficient use of resources, lower prices, greater variety, more competition, वगैरह. That is a reasonable argument for you to say कि नहीं देखो protectionism does not always work. It has certain drawbacks. ठीक तो वहाँ पे ये वाली बात sort of खत्म होती है. ठीक हो गया. So I think that is pretty much your international trade. Please do take a look at it anyways अपने end के ऊपर भी और कोई मज़ीद questions हो because most of it then eventually will get connected to the current account balance of payment or something, right? Yeah, take a look at this question. This is from another book. Explain what is meant by protectionism and consider the effects of tariffs and import quotas on the imports of a country. I think we have considered the tariff and the quota wala part. Protectionism, what is meant by protectionism is the barriers to trade. And the idea is you want to promote exports and you want to reduce imports, and you can do it through import duties and uh, import quotas. Basic दो mark की तुमने protectionism को समझाना है. उसके अलावा protectionism का I can see another question right over here. Explain what is meant by absolute and comparative advantage. Uh, sorry, it is explain what is meant by absolute advantage and compare absolute with comparative advantage. So I'll just tell you, absolute advantage is when one country has absolute advantage in one good and the other country has absolute advantage in the other good. So they can specialize in whatever they're good at and then do the trade. Comparative advantage is when one country has absolute advantage in both goods, is better in making both goods, and the other country has absolute advantage in nothing. अब क्या करें? तो ऐसी सिचुएशन में हम बोलते हैं comparative advantage deals with lower opportunity cost. कि the country which had absolute advantage in both goods, उसको दोनों goods में कौन से good के ऊपर ज्यादा अच्छा absolute advantage है, किसके अंदर ज्यादा है? तो सॉरी नॉट एब्सोल्यूट एडवांटेज बट किसमें अपॉर्चुनिटी कॉस्ट कम है. फिर जो तुम क्वेश्चन देखोगे जो मैंने फाइनल प्ले में किया हुआ है उसमें जो कंपैरेटिव एडवांटेज की एक्सप्लेनेशन है दैट्स अ गुड इनफ. इसका पार्ट बी भी वैसे तो मैं समझा चुका हूँ. इवैल्यूएट द यूजफुलनेस ऑफ दिस and then whether a country should deciding and whether country should supply accordingly. This is the question about comparative advantage. हाउ डज इट वर्क? इसकी यूजफुलनेस क्या है? इसकी यूजफुलनेस ये है कि जब आप अपॉर्चुनिटी कॉस्ट की बेसिस के ऊपर कंट्री डिसाइड करती है जहां उसके पास लोअर अपॉर्चुनिटी कॉस्ट है तो फिर उसको सर्टेन रिसोर्सेज होते हैं उसके पास. जैसे हमने लिखा ना पिछले क्वेश्चन के अंदर कि डिपेंड्स ऑन द फैक्टर एंडाउमेंट, इट डिपेंड्स ऑन योर एक्सचेंज रेट, इट डिपेंड्स ऑन मे बी रिलेटिव इन्फ्लेशन रेट, so it depends on various things. When a country has comparative advantage and it decides to make those goods, you know that your good is more competitive than your competing countries, right? And so you automatically have this advantage in being able to compete in the other markets at much more easier ways. And you can lower the prices and you can capture the foreign markets and you can earn reasonable amount of uh, foreign exchange, right? So once we explain कि comparative advantage की वजह क्या है और फिर how it works, lower opportunity cost, और उसकी वजह से आप प्रोडक्ट बेचें, आपको टर्म ऑफ ट्रेड भी अच्छा मिलेगा. आई हेट टू यूज दिस वर्ड राइट नाउ, बट आपको टर्म ऑफ ट्रेड भी अच्छा मिलेगा बिकॉज आप उस प्रोडक्ट को अच्छी प्राइस पे बेचोगे और फिर उसके बदले में अच्छा खासा इंपोर्ट मंगा सकोगे. तो दैट इज गोना बी एन एडवांटेजेस ऑन दैट साइड ऑल्सो. आपका रिसोर्स जो है वो बेटर यूटिलाइज हो रहा होगा. दे विल बी एबल टू मेक बेटर इनकम्स. इट्स सॉर्ट ऑफ लाइक you have a comparative advantage in making airplanes. So you have a labor and you have capital, which is, more equipped to deal with that making planes. If you're not making planes, then that skilled labor has no choice but to leave the country because any other thing is not going to help them out. Then you go into the limitations. बहुत सारी limitations हैं questions के अंदर कि comparative advantage कहाँ कहाँ feel होता है, just like what we discussed a little earlier. तुमने उस एंगल के ऊपर जाना है और फिर तुमने वो limitations डालनी शुरू करनी है. 2 से 3 limitations maximum, but explained one. ठीक है? So this is how you're going to answer. Information वो ही है. Comparative advantage क्या होता है? Comparative advantage क्यों मिलता है? और comparative advantage की limitation क्या है? It's just your sentence structure which just has to change slightly. Information वो ही है. All right. So I'll stop here for the day. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.